The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the cattle moving in the pasture. It wasn't the steam rising off my coffee cup either. It was a bright yellow arrow sign planted out by the county road, pointing straight at my locked ranch gate, as if my land had suddenly been turned into a tourist attraction. At first, I thought it was some prank. Maybe kids had stolen a sign from a garage sale and stuck it out there, but then my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw an email with a subject line that made my hands tremble. Reservation confirmed, 150 guests. For a moment, I actually thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I don't rent out my ranch. I don't host weddings, tours, or parties. This place is cattle, fences, and quiet mornings. Yet, here was a digital receipt, an official-looking confirmation, saying my ranch had been booked like it was some kind of event venue. The email even listed the date, time, and expected head count. 150 real estate agents. Tomorrow. At my gate. My stomach tightened. I stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking under my boots, and squinted toward the road. That's when I realized there wasn't just one arrow, there were several. A whole breadcrumb trail of neon yellow signs leading cars directly to my property. Each one read, in bold black letters, Realtor Caravan, 150. My coffee didn't taste right anymore, bitter, like something had gone sour in the middle of my morning. I set the mug down on the porch railing and walked toward the gate. That's when I spotted movement, a car slowing down, tires crunching gravel, the driver leaning forward to peer at the arrow signs. They pulled over right across from my property like they belonged there. The woman inside the car was dressed in business clothes, a phone in her hand. She kept glancing between the GPS map on her screen and my locked gate, her brow furrowed as if she were solving some puzzle. After a moment, she rolled down the window and called out, "Excuse me, is this the check-in spot for the caravan? My app says I'm supposed to be here." I walked closer, shaking my head. "Ma'am, this is private property. This ranch isn't hosting any event." She blinked at me like I'd just told her the sky was green. "But the GPS pin says..." She held her phone up. Sure enough, the digital map showed a bright red dot, smack on my gate coordinates. My gate. Not the HOA clubhouse where they usually hold their events. Not some community park. No, right here, at the entrance to my land. I asked her who told her this was the location. She scrolled and pulled up the same email I'd just received, forwarded through her real estate office. She looked genuinely embarrassed, mumbling an apology before backing her car away to wait on the roadside until she could reach the event organizers. But her confusion told me something important. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was planned, programmed, distributed. I turned back toward my house, and that's when I saw my neighbor, Rick Miller, heading over from next door. He had his phone out, snapping pictures of the signs with a puzzled grin on his face. "Jake," he called, pointing toward the road, "you planning on hosting a party today?" I shook my head, holding up my own phone. "First I've heard of it, Rick." He raised his eyebrows and gave a low whistle. "Well, somebody sure thinks you are. You'd better document this. I've got a feeling it's just getting started." Rick was right. By the time I stepped back into my kitchen, my phone buzzed again. Another notification. The event app, the one tied into the email, now showed a scheduled check-in time at my gate, 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. Bold as brass, no question about it. I set my mug down on the counter. The porcelain rattled against the wood, not from nerves, but from the sheer audacity of it all. Somebody had drawn a digital bullseye on my front gate and told 150 strangers to come knocking. And as I stood there, looking out my kitchen window at those bright yellow arrows fluttering in the breeze, I realized something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a nightmare, or maybe the beginning of a fight. Either way, my ranch had just been turned into someone else's stage, and I hadn't even been asked. Rick leaned against my fence post, still snapping photos with that old iPhone of his. The yellow arrows danced in the breeze like mocking flags. He shook his head and muttered, "I've seen some HOA nonsense in my time, Jake, but this takes the cake." He was right. This wasn't just a bad idea. It was organized. Signs printed, planted, lined up like runway lights. GPS coordinates programmed into people's phones. And now strangers were arriving at my gate, expecting to be welcomed in like paying guests. I pulled my own phone out, started taking pictures from every angle, each arrow, each email screen, even the woman in the business suit still sitting out on the public road, frowning at her phone. "Documentation," Rick said with a half smile. Can't argue with the lens. The truth is, he was smarter than he looked in those worn jeans and boots. I've learned over the years that the first thing you do when someone tries to walk over you is collect proof. Words can get twisted, memories fade, but a picture of a county road lined with arrows pointing straight to my locked gate, that tells the story all by itself. I headed back inside, grabbed a piece of poster board I kept in the pantry for ranch signs, and scrawled a message in thick black marker. No event without owner's written permission. The ink bled through the paper as I pressed hard, anger sharpening each letter. Then I marched back to the gate and tied it to the metal bars with baling wire, making sure it faced the road for every passing car, and every camera phone, to see. Rick let out a satisfied grunt. That'll make your position crystal clear. Not that they'll care, I muttered, but it'll matter when the deputy shows up. Because I wasn't waiting for this circus to unfold on its own, I pulled up the non-emergency number for the county sheriff's office and made the call. The dispatcher answered with a calm, clipped tone. I explained what was happening: unauthorized signs on the public right-of-way, an email claiming my property had been reserved without my knowledge, a caravan of realtors already beginning to arrive. Potential trespassing situation, I told her, maybe worse. She didn't sound surprised. Maybe she had heard stranger calls before, but she took down all the details, asked me to forward the photos and emails, and promised a deputy would be in the area that morning. I thanked her, hung up, and felt the first ripple of relief in my chest. At least the law was now looped in. Rick gave me a look. So, what's the game plan? Document everything, I said. Keep the gate locked, and wait for the county to see what kind of mess this really is. He chuckled and shook his head. You're going to need more coffee. Inside, I poured myself another cup, the bitter taste still lingering from earlier. I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through the email again. The sender's name glared back at me: Karen Ellison, president of the HOA next door. The same woman who thought her neighborhood rules gave her power over land she didn't own. The email was short, businesslike, and full of assumption. She called it a reservation. She talked about community showcase access, as if those words were magic keys that unlocked private gates. She even mentioned the subdivision's CCNRs, covenants, conditions, restrictions, as if their little rulebook had any legal standing on my property. It was like somebody claiming their neighborhood bylaws gave them VIP rights to your living room couch. My jaw tightened as I read it again. It wasn't just arrogance. It was presumption, dressed up in official language. From the window I saw another car slowing near the gate, the driver craning his neck toward the sign I'd just posted. He frowned, picked up his phone, and started dialing. A moment later, I spotted a second car pulling over behind him, and then a third. The arrows had done their job. The red dot on the GPS was pulling people in like moths to a porch light. I lifted my cup, stared at the steam rising. This is only the beginning, I whispered to myself. Out on the road, the first realtor climbed out of her car, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and started walking toward the locked gate. The nightmare was already unfolding, one confused visitor at a time. By late morning, the shoulder of the county road looked less like open country and more like the lobby of a busy hotel, if a hotel lobby had dust devils and bawling cabs in the background. A pop-up tent appeared first, its fabric snapping in the breeze. Then a folding table, then neat rows of orange traffic cones that tried and failed to make the gravel look official. Someone unfurled a vinyl banner that read, Realtor Caravan, 150 in cheerful letters, the kind of cheerful that makes your jaw clench. I stood at my gate with the sign I'd wired up, no event without owner's written permission, and watched the production bloom across the right-of-way as if the county had suddenly leased my frontage to a circus. Cars kept arriving in twos and threes, easing in, noses pointed toward the arrows that lined the ditch like runway lights. Doors opened, heels clicked on asphalt, voices rose and fell, chipper, professional, a little impatient. Check in, someone called toward the tent. 2:30 tomorrow, another answered, consulting a clipboard. But the app says we can pre-stage here today. Pre-stage. That word landed like a spur against bone. Rick drifted to my side, camera already working. You see they're using the shoulder like a waiting room, he said. It's a lobby without a building. Lobby or not, I said quietly, it isn't permitted. A white pickup rolled up and parked half on, half off the gravel. A man hopped out wearing a reflective vest and a tool belt that clanked like an argument. Brandon Cho, the contractor whose company offered access assurance for events. He moved with the brisk confidence of a man who expected to be waved through. When he reached the gate, he gave my lock a casual, professional look, the way a dentist glances at molars he's about to drill. "Morning," he said. "We're here to make sure the gate can handle event traffic." "Event traffic?" I repeated. "On private property." He tapped his clipboard, unfazed. "Cleared by the HOA. We're installing temporary access controls and confirming load tolerance. Should be quick." I held out my palm. "Insurance certificate." He handed over a neatly laminated copy. I scanned the page, and my stomach did that slow, steady drop you feel when a bridge starts to sway in the wind. The policy listed a location that sounded close to my place, but not exactly it. Community Ranch Access Point, as if naming a thing politely made it real. The third line was the one that mattered. Additional insured, a blank stripe of paper where my name should have been. "Mr. Cho," I said, keeping my voice even for the growing audience of phones pointed in our direction, "this certificate doesn't cover my property or me." He reached for it, then stopped. Professionals can feel liability like cattle feel a storm. "We were told this address was authorized," he said carefully. "By whom?" "HOA Event Management." He hesitated, then added, "Their president." "Karen Ellison," I said. He gave the tiniest nod, eyes flicking to my sign. Across the road, a woman in a navy suit called, "Is this going to take long? We have a schedule." A second later, I heard the soft rattle of a phone going live. Rick stepped closer. "Mind if I photograph your COI?" he asked. "For our records." Brandon let him, which told me he had already started talking himself backward in his head. "Look," Brandon said, lowering his voice, "I'm just here to do the prep. If the insurance isn't right, I can call dispatch." "That'd be wise," I said, "before somebody decides to start cutting things they don't own." He tried on a quick smile that didn't fit, then retreated toward his truck to make the call. Meanwhile, the makeshift check-in table had drawn a small cluster of agents. One passed out lanyards and glossy maps. Another practiced her greeting voice. "Welcome, we're so glad you came." She trailed off when she noticed my sign. "Is that new?" she asked her colleague. "It's a misunderstanding," the colleague said brightly, like someone smoothing a tablecloth over a stain. "We have authorization." "From whom?" I asked, not bothering to raise my voice. The wind carried the words for me. Silence, then a flurry of glances at phones. The yellow arrow nearest my gate wobbled on its stake, nodding as if it agreed with me. Funny thing about arrows, they point, but they don't decide. People do. I rested my hand on the top rail and studied the growing scene. The more official it looked, clipboards, cones, a banner flapping like an invitation, the more dangerous it became. Not because anyone there wanted harm, most of them were just doing what an app told them to do. The danger was the story they were telling themselves. This is already arranged. That story makes reasonable people unreasonable faster than whiskey on an empty stomach. A sedan eased up to the line of cars and stopped, blocking half the lane. The driver, a man in a blazer too hot for the day, leaned out his window and shouted, "Hey, can we get the gate open for a quick recon? We paid for access." Rick didn't miss a beat. "You paid someone?" he called back. "You didn't pay the owner." A ripple of laughter moved through the cluster near the table, half nervous, half mean. Laughter is easy when you think you're in the right. I took a breath and stepped forward so they could all see me plainly, and, more importantly, hear me clearly over the rustle of the tent. "Folks," I said, "this is private property. No one has my written permission. There are no permits for structures on the right-of-way. You can wait on the public road, but you will not enter this ranch." Phones rose higher. Somewhere to my left, a video title was spoken aloud for the algorithm. "HOA reserves private ranch. Owner says no." Brandon returned, the phone still warm in his hand. His face had shifted, less sure, more cautious. "My dispatcher says we pause until we have the correct insurance endorsement and written owner authorization," he said. "I'm instructed not to proceed." The Navy suit woman made a frustrated sound. "We were promised." "Promises aren't paperwork," I said. She rolled her eyes and turned away, broadcasting a sigh to her audience online. Rick leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Lobby's getting crowded. Crowded lobbies have fire codes," I murmured. Crowded road shoulders have deputies. As if summoned by the thought, a siren wailed far off, then died to a polite whoop. Heads turned. Out beyond the string of arrows, a tan patrol SUV crested the hill and started down toward us, light bar winking in the clear noon sun. The pop-up tent flapped like a startled bird. Cones shivered in the wind. The banner flexed and then, as if reconsidering its tone, sagged an inch on one corner. I tightened the baling wire on my sign, the metal warm under my palm. This patch of dust and gravel wasn't a lobby. It was still a county shoulder in front of a private gate, and the law was about to say so out loud. Behind me, the cattle shifted, hooves thudding softly in the dry ground. They didn't care about schedules or apps or head counts. They cared that the gate stayed shut. So did I. The deputy's SUV rolled to a stop with the kind of authority only a county vehicle can bring. Dust curled up around the tires, drifting into the sunlight like smoke from a slow fire. The chatter at the roadside dimmed. As if everyone had suddenly remembered they were on somebody else's property line. The door opened, and out stepped Deputy Harris, a broad man with a sunburned neck and a habit of pausing before he spoke, which made every word land heavier. His Stetson shaded his eyes, but I could see them sweeping the scene. The cones, the tent, the banner, the line of parked cars, and finally, my sign on the gate. He took it all in like evidence before a jury. "Morning," he said, voice carrying across the road. "Whose property is this?" I raised my hand. "Mine, Jake Hollis, private ranch, no permission granted for any event." He nodded once, then turned toward the pop-up tent where a pair of Realtors were shuffling papers like nervous schoolkids. "Permits?" he asked flatly. A woman in heels cleared her throat. We're told by the HOA that county approval was already on file." Deputy Harris didn't blink. "Do you have those permits on you?" She fumbled in her tote bag and produced a plastic sleeve. He flipped through the pages, lips tightening. "This is a work order, not a permit. And this," he tapped the certificate of insurance Rick had photographed earlier, "doesn't list the property owner as additional insured, which means if someone trips on Mr. Hollis's gravel, you're out of luck." Phones hovered higher, catching every syllable. Harris knew it. He didn't raise his voice, but he let the silence after his words stretch long enough for the crowd to taste it. I handed him the folder I'd been keeping close. Emails, photos, GPS screenshots. He flipped through quickly, then looked back at the gathering with something between disbelief and irritation. No permit applications were filed with the county. No consent on record from the property owner. Yet, here you are setting up tents on a road shoulder. Rick muttered, "Lobby's closed." One of the younger agents tried to salvage the mood. "But, Deputy, the app directed us here. The GPS pin says check-in is at this gate." Harris's gaze sharpened. "Pins don't grant permission. Property owners do." He snapped a picture of the orange cones with his county-issued phone. "And you're encroaching on public right-of-way without authorization. That's citation territory." The security guard near the banner shuffled uneasily, radio still in hand. "We were just told to set up staging, sir." "By whom?" Harris pressed. The guard hesitated. "The HOA president, Ms. Ellison." A ripple went through the group like wind through dry grass. Everyone knew the name, but nobody wanted to own it. I pointed at my sign again, the black letters plain against the white poster board. "I put it in writing this morning. No event without written owner permission. Doesn't get simpler than that." Harris studied the sign, then gave a short nod. "Clear enough for me." He turned back to the crowd, tone shifting from patient to official. "Here's what's going to happen. You will remove the cones, the table, and that banner from the county shoulder immediately. You will cease all attempts to access this ranch. If I return and see structures back on this right-of-way, citations will be issued on the spot." The woman in heels tried again. "But we have over 100 agents scheduled." "Not my problem," Harris cut in, voice still even. "The problem is you planned an event on land you don't own, without permits, and without insurance coverage. Fix your plan. Somewhere else." Murmurs rippled through the group. A few agents started folding chairs. The banner sagged lower, one corner popping free in the wind. The whole setup unraveled like a carnival shutting down before dark. Rick whispered, "That's one way to clear a lobby." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. The deputy's calm presence was like a fence post driven straight into shifting ground. For the first time all morning, it felt like the line was holding. Still, as the crowd thinned, I caught sight of a black SUV idling farther back. tinted windows reflecting the afternoon glare. I didn't need a closer look to know who was inside. Karen Ellison wasn't the type to let her show collapse without a last act. The tent came down, the cones were stacked, the banner was rolled tight, but the unease in my gut didn't leave. It just shifted, coiling low, waiting for the next move, because I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The crowd was thinning, chairs folded, banner rolled, but the black SUV with tinted windows hadn't moved an inch. I watched it idle on the far side of the gravel shoulder, exhaust ghosting in the warm air. A part of me hoped whoever sat behind that glass would drive away quiet. But I knew better. Some people don't leave until they've had their scene. Sure enough, the driver's door swung open with a practiced flick, and Karen Ellison emerged like she'd been waiting for applause. HOA president, self-appointed queen of the subdivision, and the reason 100 real estate agents had GPS pins pointing at my gate. She wore a blazer 2 shades too formal for a roadside standoff, and carried a binder fat with tabs. Her heels sank slightly in the gravel, but she didn't let it slow her. She strode toward Deputy Harris like a lawyer approaching the bench. "Deputy," she began, voice smooth, "there's been a misunderstanding. Our HOA has long-standing community access rights adjacent to this property. We've merely organized today's caravan in alignment with those rights." Harris didn't blink. "Ma'am, community rights don't override private ownership. This ranch is not part of your subdivision." Karen's smile didn't falter, but it thinned. "With respect, the CC&Rs," she opened her binder to a highlighted page, "establish access corridors intended for community benefit. This gate marks a historical point of entry." I cut in before Harris had to. "Historical entry for cattle, maybe, not for caravans of strangers. Those CC&Rs govern your subdivision, not my land." Phones were up again, agents catching the clash. Karen adjusted her stance, pivoting slightly toward the cameras. She knew her audience. "Mr. Hollis," she said sweetly, "surely you understand the value of cooperation. This event supports property values across the area, including your ranch. When the community thrives, everyone benefits." I couldn't help but laugh, low and dry. "My cattle don't care about your property values, and I don't trade access for hypothetical benefits." A ripple of chuckles moved through the onlookers. Karen's jaw tightened, but she pressed on. "We've already invested significant resources. Vendors, insurance, scheduling." Harris held up the certificate I'd given him earlier. "This insurance doesn't list the owner. It doesn't cover his land, which means if anyone crosses this gate, they do so without protection. That's a liability for you, your HOA, and anyone following your directions." Karen's binder closed with a sharp snap. She tried a different tack. "Deputy, surely you recognize the importance of community harmony. If Mr. Hollis insists on stonewalling—" "Stonewalling?" I repeated, stepping closer to the gate. "Lady, it's called a fence, built to keep livestock in and trespassers out. Nothing complicated about it." Rick chuckled from behind his camera, and a couple of agents murmured agreement. Karen shot them a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Her voice rose, sharper now. "We had every reason to believe this location was approved. The county documents indicated—" Harris cut her off, tone firm. "I've spoken with the county, no permits issued, no approvals filed. If you've been telling people otherwise, you're misrepresenting government authority. That's serious." For the first time, Karen's poise slipped. A flush crept up her neck. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then tried a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll clarify the paperwork," she managed. "But this doesn't need to become adversarial." "It already is," I said quietly. "You brought 100 people to my gate with a fake reservation. You turned my ranch into a backdrop for your business without ever asking me." The silence after that was heavy. Even the wind seemed to pause. Karen glanced at the cameras, then back at Harris. "Deputy, perhaps we can find a compromise. Limited access, a brief check-in at the gate, nothing more." Harris's answer was final. "No access without the owner's written consent. That's the law. End of story." Her eyes met mine, hard as flint. For a moment I could see the fight in her, the refusal to back down. But the deputy stood between us, uniform and authority anchoring the moment. Finally, she gave a curt nod, spun on her heel, and stalked back toward her SUV. The binder bounced against her side with every step, papers rustling inside like restless ghosts. When the door slammed shut, the black SUV lingered one heartbeat too long, then rolled away slow, leaving dust hanging in the air like unfinished business. Rick whistled softly. "She'll be back." I nodded, eyes still on the fading trail of dust. Yeah, that was just her first act. That night, long after the cones were cleared and the last car had rolled away, I sat at my kitchen table with a lamp burning low. The ranch was quiet again, quiet in that way you feel deep in your chest. But the stillness didn't reach my mind. I kept turning over the same question. How did Karen convince 100 realtors this gate was open when it never was? The answer came buzzing in my inbox just after 10. An email, forwarded from one of the agents who'd shown up earlier, subject line bold as brass. County consent. Hollis Ranch access approved. I opened it. The letterhead looked official, the seal of the county printed in faint watermark. The message was short, clipped, bureaucratic. Consent has been recorded for community event access. No further permits required. At the bottom, in italics, it read, "Owner authorized." I felt my stomach tighten. The word authorized sat there like a rattlesnake coiled in the corner of the room. Only it wasn't my signature. It wasn't my hand. It wasn't even my language. I read it twice more, then leaned back in my chair. Somewhere between the bad grammar and the suspicious timestamp, I smelled something rotten. Ranchers know when hay's gone sour. You don't need to chew it to know. Same with paperwork. This wasn't right. Next morning, I drove into town and parked outside the county administration building. Inside, the halls smelled of floor polish and old paper. I found Ellen Carter, head of the permits, sitting behind a desk stacked with binders that looked like they had been there since the Carter administration. She adjusted her glasses as I spread the email across her desk. She scanned it, frown deepening. "Who sent you this?" "Forwarded from a realtor," I said. "Claimed the county already had consent on file for my ranch." Ellen shook her head. "We don't issue blanket consents. And certainly not without a written application from the property owner. That's the law." She tapped a few keys, pulled up the county database. Nothing under my name, nothing under Ellison's, nothing at all. Then she printed the email header, a block of technical gibberish I couldn't read. She circled one line in red ink. "See this? It didn't come from our server. It came from the HOA's newsletter domain." She leaned back, eyes narrowing. "That's forgery, Mr. Hollis. Digital forgery. Very serious." The word forgery dropped like a branding iron in my gut. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means someone used the HOA's email system to dress up a message like it came from us. That's not a clerical mistake. That's criminal misrepresentation of government authority." She clicked again, pulling up regulations, flipping to the section on public assemblies. Any event over 50 people requires either written owner consent or a special use permit. Your ranch was listed for 150. Without either, the event's illegal before it starts. She showed me the attachment too, a scanned consent JPG. At the bottom it read, "Owner authorized." Ellen jabbed a finger at it. "Notice it avoids the word written? That's intentional. Verbal consent isn't enough for events this size." I felt heat rise in my chest. They hadn't just bent the rules. They'd snapped them clean in two and tried to glue the pieces together with lies. Ellen filed copies into a folder thick enough to serve as a weapon. "I'll be sending this to IT and to the sheriff's office. They need to know someone's forging government documents." I left the office with that folder heavy in my hands. Outside, the sun was bright, the courthouse steps hot under my boots. But all I could think about was the gall it took to type those words, hit send, and hope nobody looked too close. Back at the ranch, I laid out the papers on my table. Rick came over, coffee in hand, and whistled low. "So they forged county consent. That's not just pushy, Jake. That's fraud. Fraud. Forgery. Two words that turn neighborly disputes into court cases." I stared at the email, at the fake seal, at the sloppy signature line. And I realized something. This wasn't Karen improvising. This was planned. Somebody had mapped GPS pins, printed signs, hired contractors, and built the entire house of cards on a lie. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Available for a call to discuss ranch access, no name, no context, just that. I saved the number, my jaw tightened. Because I already knew whose voice I'd hear when I picked it up. And I knew, too, that the real fight was just getting started. The number buzzed again at 2 o'clock sharp, right on schedule, as if whoever sent that text had an alarm set. Caller ID didn't give a name, just a string of digits. I already knew. I put the phone on speaker, set it next to the little digital recorder I keep by habit. One-party consent is plenty in this state. "Mr. Hollis," came the voice, smooth as varnish and twice as artificial. "Karen Ellison." I leaned back in my chair, let her words fill the kitchen. "I believe there's been some confusion about our realtor caravan," she continued. "I wanted to call personally to resolve any misunderstandings about access to your ranch." I sipped my coffee, kept quiet. Let her talk. Folks like Karen will tell you more than you asked for if you give them rope. "We've been planning this event for months," she went on. "It's part of our community outreach program. The MLS requires strong engagement metrics to maintain our certification. Without 50 confirmed attendees, we risk losing sponsor support." There it was, the real motive, laid out clean. Not about neighborliness, not about shared values. Numbers, metrics, a box to tick. I asked lightly, "How many people you got lined up?" 150 registered, she said without hesitation. "But 50 is the minimum threshold. We can't afford to fall short." Her voice carried that mix of stress and entitlement I'd come to recognize. Like the rules applied to everyone else, but not to her. "And you thought my gate was the right place to solve that problem?" I asked. "Mr. Hollis, with respect, the CCNRs establish implied access for bordering properties. People have used the trail for years. We considered it community precedent." I almost laughed. Walking dogs on a trail isn't the same as bussing in 150 agents. That's not precedent, that's trespass. There was a pause, long enough I thought the call might have dropped. Then her tone shifted, silk over steel. "Surely you understand the importance of community cooperation," she pressed. "Events like this raise property values across the board, including yours." I let out a slow breath, careful not to sound as angry as I felt. "Community cooperation starts with asking permission, not forging emails that look like county consent." Her voice tightened. "That was a clerical mix-up by our management company. Nothing fraudulent." I glanced at the printouts Ellen had circled in red. Every header, every failed authentication stamp. Fraud dressed in Sunday clothes is still fraud. Karen regrouped quickly. "Look, we don't need full access, just a simple check-in at your gate. A brief presence, no disruption. I'll even send you the official route sheet so you can see how minimal it is." Now that caught my attention. "Send it," I said. "I'd be curious." "Wonderful," she replied, relief sliding into her tone. "You'll see, it's really not an imposition. The ranch gate is just a stop, not the destination." We wrapped the call polite enough, but the recorder kept humming, locking away every word she'd said. About MLS thresholds, about precedent, about that so-called mix-up. 10 minutes later, my inbox chimed. Attached was a PDF, HOA logo at the top, neat columns of times and addresses. Most of it was subdivision homes and the clubhouse. But there, bold as brass on the final line, ranch gate check-in, 2:30 p.m. My address printed right beside it. I printed it twice, spread it across the table, let the camera on my phone capture the document with my coffee cup in the frame. Proof, not rumor, not mistake. Deliberate planning, documented and distributed. Rick came by just as I was photographing it. He leaned over my shoulder, shook his head. "They actually wrote it down. Your gate, the final stop. That's about as clear as it gets." I nodded, my jaw set. "She thinks sending this makes it reasonable. All it does is prove she knew exactly what she was doing." I tucked the route sheet into the same folder as the forged consent email. The stack was growing. GPS pins, insurance gaps, forged documents, now a route sheet with my address printed in black ink. Each piece fit together like a puzzle you didn't want to finish because you already knew the picture. A takeover in slow motion. The recorder's red light clicked off when I pressed the button. That file, along with the papers, was going to the county. Karen might think this was a negotiation. To me, it was evidence. And evidence has weight. Enough weight to crush lies flat. The next afternoon, the wind carried a different kind of sound. Radios crackling, engines idling, the restless shuffle of too many shoes on gravel. By 2 o'clock sharp, the county road outside my ranch looked like a parade staging ground. Cars stacked nose to tail, agents spilling out with phones in hand, their expressions caught somewhere between annoyance and curiosity. I watched from the kitchen window as a security guard paced by the check-in tent they'd dared to set up again, headset pressed to his ear. Then came the vehicle that made my pulse quicken. A white van with locksmith services stenciled on the side in bold black letters. The driver hopped out with a toolkit slung over his shoulder, moving like a man who had cut 1,000 locks before breakfast. He didn't even glance at the tent, went straight for my gate like it was an appointment on his calendar. I stepped outside, the afternoon sun hot on my neck. Rick right behind me with his camera rolling. "Afternoon," I called, loud enough for the crowd. "What's the nature of this job?" The locksmith looked up, polite but brisk. "Work order to remove the lock, sir. Event access." He held up a clipboard with paperwork that had all the trappings of officialdom: letterhead, signature line, neat formatting. I scanned it. Heart steady but hands tight. No property owner authorization anywhere. Just cleared by HOA. "Do you have signed consent from the property owner?" I asked, pointing at the blank space where my name should have been. He frowned, double-checked, then admitted, "No, but my company was told it was already approved. We were hired to make sure access was available." Before I could answer, a voice rose sharp from the roadside crowd. A woman in a blazer shouted, "Just cut it already! We paid for access!" Phones tilted up, lenses drinking in every detail. The locksmith froze, eyes darting from me to the audience. Professionals know when the spotlight's hot, and this one was scorching. Rick stepped closer, holding out the insurance certificate Ellen had flagged days earlier. "You might want to look at this too," he said. His finger tapped the blank line. "No additional insured. Jake Hollis isn't covered." The locksmith's eyes narrowed, reading the fine print. His shoulders stiffened, toolkit slipping slightly in his grip. "Sir," he said carefully, "if the insurance doesn't cover you, I can't touch this lock. My company won't risk that liability." The crowd muttered, restless, the weight of their wasted drive pressing in. A few shouted complaints. "This is ridiculous! Why bring us here if it's wrong?" And then salvation came in the form of a tan patrol SUV pulling up with lights flashing. Deputy Harris again. He climbed out, surveyed the scene, and walked straight to my gate. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice calm but firm. I handed him the locksmith's paperwork, the same insurance certificate, and pointed to my homemade sign still wired to the gate. "No event without owner's written permission." Harris skimmed the papers, then lifted his head. "Without the owner's consent and proper coverage, this event isn't authorized. Period." He turned to the locksmith. "If you cut that lock, you're liable for trespass and property damage." The man nodded quickly, relief obvious. "Then I'm packing up." He snapped his toolbox shut and hustled back to his van, ignoring the groans from the roadside. Harris shifted his gaze to the crowd. "Do you have permits for these structures on the shoulder?" he asked, motioning toward the cones, the folding table, the banner flapping in the breeze. A security guard stammered, "No permits, sir." "Then clear it, now," Harris ordered. "This is county property, not a staging ground. Leave it or face citations." The guard barked instructions into his radio. Within minutes, the cones were yanked up, the table folded, the banner stuffed back into its case. The agents muttered, phones still recording, disappointment curdling into frustration. Rick whispered beside me, "That's twice they've tried to storm the castle. Twice the law has turned them back." I nodded, watching Karen's SUV appear again at the edge of the scene. This time she didn't step out, just sat with the window down, phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, I could feel her fury brewing, the kind that doesn't quit when the deputy drives away. But for now, the gate held, the lock stayed intact, and the law was on my side. Still, as the locksmith's van disappeared down the road, I knew the battle wasn't finished. You don't bring in hired men with toolkits unless you're ready to escalate. Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. After the locksmith's van disappeared and the deputy's SUV faded down the road, the dust finally settled. For the first time all day, the shoulder in front of my ranch was empty. No tents, no cones, no clipboards, just the yellow arrows still staked in the ditch like stubborn weeds. Rick stayed behind while the others packed out. He set his camera down on the hood of his truck and opened his laptop. "Jake," he said, eyes narrowing at the screen, "you need to see this." I pulled up a chair beside him, the metal hot from the sun. He'd logged into the county's public GIS system, the mapping database contractors use when they want to know where property lines and utilities sit. He clicked layer after layer until the screen bloomed with colored lines and shaded polygons. "There," Rick said, tapping the map. "See that red strip, labeled Proposed Corridor, runs straight through your gate. I leaned closer. Sure enough, a crimson line traced across my parcel, right where the road dead-ended at my lock. On the map it looked official, permanent, almost inevitable. But it's labeled proposed, I said slowly. Exactly. Proposed, not approved. Rick clicked another layer, toggling on the official recorded easements. Nothing crossed my land. They're trying to pass off a planning sketch as if it's law. The hairs on my arms stood up. Suddenly it all fit together. The forged consent email, the bogus insurance, the route sheet with my address bold at the bottom. They had found a map online, saw a red line that looked like a shortcut, and decided to treat it like gospel. Rick pulled up the metadata on the GIS entry. Last edited by HOA Planning Commission, uploaded 3 months ago. Not county surveyors, not engineers, just them. I blew out a breath, anger rising. So, Karen waved this map around to her people, told them the corridor was already approved, and built her whole caravan on it. Yep, Rick said grimly. She weaponized a draft. I thought back to the crowd of agents live streaming at my gate, their certainty that they were in the right. They hadn't been lying. They'd been misled. They trusted the wrong map. Rick printed a screenshot, slid it across the hood to me. The red line glared up like a wound. That's your smoking gun, he said. Proof they knew it wasn't legal, but pretended it was. I carried the printout inside, set it beside the forged consent letter and the route sheet. Piece by piece, the evidence was stacking high enough to build a fence all its own. But as I looked at that crimson strip cutting through my land, a darker thought gnawed at me. Maps have power. Once a line gets drawn, people believe it. Doesn't matter if it's marked proposed. Enough repetition, and it becomes real in their heads. Out front, a car slowed as if by habit, GPS chirping directions toward my gate. The driver hesitated, saw no tent, then pulled away confused. Even without Karen, the algorithm kept sending people here. I gripped the edge of the table. It wasn't just my lock they were after. It was the story of my land, rewritten on a county website by people who never set foot on it. That evening, Ellen from the permits office called. I told her what we'd found. She sighed, weary but sharp. We'll flag the GIS layer immediately. Draft proposals should never be published as active routes. That's misrepresentation, her voice hardened. And if the HOA submitted that themselves, that's evidence of intent. Keep everything you've got, Mr. Hollis. This isn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It's potential fraud on a county system. When I hung up, the ranch was quiet again, but the silence felt different, charged, waiting. I walked down to the gate, laid my hand on the lock. The yellow arrows rustled in the evening breeze, pointing at nothing but my fence. Rick joined me, holding the printout. Funny thing, he said. A red line on a screen nearly turned into 100 people on your land. I nodded, jaw tight. And if we don't stop it, next time it won't be proposed, it'll be permanent. The sun dipped low, painting the fields in gold. I stood there until the shadows stretched long, the map's crimson scar still burning in my mind. By Saturday afternoon, you could feel it in the air, the kind of nervous current that makes cattle shift before a storm. The GPS pins were still alive, still luring cars toward my ranch like moths to a porch light. By 2 o'clock, the line of vehicles stretched half a mile down the county road. Agents leaned on hoods, adjusted blazers, tapped at phones. Rick and I stood at the gate, cameras rolling, the folder of evidence tucked under my arm. Deputy Harris had returned too, parked off to the side, watching with that slow patience he carried like a badge heavier than the one on his chest. At exactly 2:25, the first minibus appeared, packed with agents chattering like tourists on their way to a wine tasting. Tires crunched on gravel, doors hissed open. They filed out, badges already swinging on lanyards, phones ready to scan. A voice rose over the crowd, Karen's, sharp as a hawk's cry. She'd arrived in her black SUV, this time stepping out in front of everyone, binder under one arm like a queen descending from her carriage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "welcome to our featured stop, Hollis Ranch Gate." The crowd clapped. Actually clapped, as if the fence behind me was a stage curtain waiting to be pulled back. Karen raised her phone, opened the MLS event app, and tapped the check-in button. A beat of silence. Then her face shifted. Instead of the bright green "confirmed," her screen flashed red. Invalid location. A ripple went through the agents as they tapped it as their own phones. One by one, the same error popped up. Invalid. 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 100 tiny screens pulsing with rejection. Confusion turned to frustration. Voices rose. What do you mean, invalid? We're at the pin. This is supposed to be the check-in. Karen tried to recover, her smile tight. It's a system glitch. Refresh the page. They did. Same result. From behind me, Rick's voice cut through the noise. Not a glitch. The county pulled the corridor layer. GPS doesn't recognize this gate anymore. He held up the printout of the GIS map, the big red line now marked proposed, not approved in bold overlay. Harris had insisted the county make it live that morning, just in time. The agents crowded closer, waving their phones like torches. We drove hours for this, one shouted. We need credit. Karen's face flushed crimson, her binder pressed hard against her chest. She turned on me, fury sharp enough to cut wire. You've sabotaged a professional event, Mr. Hollis. Do you realize the consequences? I kept my voice steady, loud enough for every phone camera. You forged county consent. You printed my address on your route sheet. You brought 150 people to a gate you don't own. The only sabotage here is the lie you told. The crowd murmured, unease spreading. A few agents lowered their phones, doubt creeping in. Karen spun toward Deputy Harris, desperate. Deputy, surely you see this as harassment. He's obstructing legitimate business. Harris stepped forward, calm but iron. Ma'am, the law doesn't work that way. There are no permits, no owner consent, and no valid insurance. This event is unauthorized. You need to disperse immediately. The words hung heavy in the hot air. Then, as if to punctuate them, the minibus driver honked twice, impatient. He leaned out the window. You want me to unload the next group or what? Go, Karen barked, but Harris raised his hand, palm out. No further unloading. This stop is closed. That was the breaking point. The crowd erupted. Some agents shouted at Karen. You said this was approved. You promised check-in credits. Others turned on me, filming, accusing. Why won't you cooperate? Rick caught it all, his camera steady, lens glinting in the sun. Then chaos struck. One of the minibus tires clipped a cone someone had left half buried. The bus lurched, tilting toward the ditch. Gasps rippled. For a second it looked like it might roll. The driver fought the wheel, overcorrected, and slammed to a stop inches from the fence line. Dust billowed. Agents stumbled back, coughing. The driver swore, slamming the door shut. I'm done. Not worth it. He gunned the engine, gravel spitting, and the bus roared off down the road. Phones captured every second. Livestream comments scrolled fast. Karen lied. Owner shut it down. Invalid location equals fraud? Karen's composure finally cracked. She turned in a slow circle, eyes wild, realizing the narrative had slipped from her grip. The hashtag was already writing itself in the feeds. Hashtag invalidgate. Deputy Harris pulled his citation pad. Ma'am, you've created a public hazard. Staging without permits, misrepresentation of county documents. You'll need to come with me for a formal statement. Karen's mouth opened, shut, then opened again, words failing under the weight of cameras. Finally, she snapped her binder closed and stalked toward her SUV. The door slammed, the engine growled, and she peeled away, leaving her agents standing in a cloud of dust and betrayal. The crowd dissolved after that, grumbling, phones buzzing with messages. Some apologized quietly as they left, others cursed under their breath, but they all left. When the last car disappeared over the hill, the road was silent, just me, Rick, and Harris by the gate. Rick lowered his camera, exhaled long. That was it, the showdown, and she lost. Harris nodded, tucking his pad away. Keep all your evidence, Mr. Hollis. This isn't just an HOA spat anymore. County attorneys will want a word. I touched the lock on my gate. Still solid, still mine. The sun glinted off its steel like a promise. Behind me, the cattle lowed, restless but unharmed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the land itself exhale relief. The storm had broken, but the cleanup was still to come. 3 days later, I sat in the back row of the community center, hat in my lap, listening as the HOA board tried to stitch together what was left of their credibility. The room smelled of coffee gone cold and nervous sweat. Folding chairs creaked as neighbors shifted, waiting for the fireworks. At the front table sat Karen Ellison, binder closed for once, face pale but composed. Beside her was Sophie Lane, the HOA manager, lips tight as a purse string. A county attorney hovered at the end of the table, arms folded, there not to participate but to observe. His presence alone was enough to hush the crowd. The chairman cleared his throat. "We are here to address the events of last Saturday, specifically the Realtor caravan incident." Murmurs ran through the room. Incident was putting it mildly. Karen adjusted her mic, voice thinner than usual. "On behalf of the HOA, I want to express regret for the misunderstanding that occurred. Our intentions were to promote community visibility. Unfortunately, certain steps were mishandled, and consent was not properly obtained." The crowd stirred. Someone muttered, "Forged emails ain't mishandling." Another whispered, "She nearly got us sued." The county attorney raised a brow, scribbled something in his notebook. Sophie leaned in, reading from a prepared statement. "Effective immediately, the HOA will correct the GPS coordinates that erroneously directed members and guests toward private property. We will also implement stricter review of event planning to ensure compliance with county regulations." Then came the words I never thought I'd hear. "Additionally, the board has voted to formally censure President Ellison for overstepping her authority. She will retain her position until the end of term, but without independent planning privileges." A gasp rippled through the room. Karen's face tightened, but she didn't protest. Not with the attorney watching, not with neighbors glaring holes through her. I stood, hat in hand. "That's fine as far as it goes, but let's be clear, this wasn't a GPS glitch or a clerical mix-up. This was an intentional attempt to use my ranch without permission. I won't stand for it again." Applause broke out in pockets, surprising in its warmth. Even folks who had once sided with Karen clapped, maybe realizing how close they'd come to disaster. After the meeting, neighbors shook my hand, some embarrassed, some relieved. One older couple thanked me outright. "We didn't know what was happening till we saw the live stream. Glad you held the line." Rick caught it all, lens steady. "Looks like you won the court of public opinion," he whispered, but the victory felt bigger than that. The next morning, an email arrived from Laura Nguyen, a manager at a local events company. Subject line, "Proper rental inquiry, Hollis Ranch." She wrote, "Mr. Hollis, we've followed the recent news. Our company organizes agricultural tours and would love to rent your ranch legitimately for small groups. We can provide full insurance, county permits, and written contracts. Would you consider it?" I stared at the screen, almost laughed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Where Karen tried to steal, Laura offered to pay fair and square. I replied cautiously, but the thought stayed with me. Maybe my ranch could host something that fit its character. Educational tours, farm-to-table dinners, without selling its soul to flashy caravans. That afternoon, the county attorney called. "We're tightening how planning drafts appear on the GIS system. No more publishing proposed corridors as if they're active. And Mr. Hollis, thank you for flagging this. You saved us a legal mess." Saved them, saved myself, maybe even saved Karen from worse than censure. By evening, the road outside my gate was empty again. No cones, no tents, no buses, just gravel, wire fence, and a sky stretching wide. Rick leaned against the post, arms crossed. "Feels different now," he said. "Yeah," I answered, "like the land's breathing easier." The lock on my gate clicked firm under my hand, steel against steel, my name on every acre behind it. For the first time in weeks, I believed the storm had finally passed. But I also knew something else. Storms always leave lessons, and I wasn't about to forget mine. The morning after the board meeting, I walked the fence line with a thermos of hot coffee and the crisp bite of autumn in the air. The cattle moved slow in the distance, heads down in the dew-heavy grass. The world had settled back into its rhythm, steady, unhurried, unbothered. At the end of the lane, I found one last yellow arrow sign half buried in weeds, forgotten when the cleanup crews scrambled. Its plastic surface was bent. The words "Realtor Caravan" faded from dust and rain. I picked it up, turned it in my hands. For a moment, I thought about how much chaos that little arrow had caused. Cars lining the road, strangers at my gate, a president with too much confidence in her own authority. Funny how something so cheap could nearly spark a war over land. Rick ambled up behind me, camera hanging at his side as usual. "Souvenir?" he asked. "Reminder," I said. "That permission is something you give, not something anyone else gets to assume." He nodded, and for once didn't raise his lens. Some things didn't need recording. Back at the house, I leaned the arrow against the barn wall, not as a trophy, more like a warning. Every time I walked past, I'd see it and remember how close I'd come to losing control of my own gate. Later that afternoon, the county deputy dropped by with copies of his final report. He shook my hand firmly. "It's closed on our end, but if they try anything like this again, you've got everything you need to push back." I thanked him, slid the folder into my filing cabinet under property rights. The drawer clanged shut, final as a gavel. That evening, as the sun stretched long across the pasture, I sat on the porch with Rick, both of us quiet. The cicadas started their chorus, the wind tugged at the grass, and for the first time in weeks, the ranch felt like it belonged only to me again. I thought about Karen's apology, awkward, half-swallowed, but public. Thought about the board's censure. Thought about that legitimate rental request sitting in my inbox the first time anyone had bothered to ask the right way. Maybe someday I'd say yes to something small, something fitting, but it would be my choice. My gate, my land, my decision. When the porch light flickered on and the stars cut sharp against the black, I realized something simple. Saying no wasn't about stubbornness. It was about drawing a line where none existed before. That's the lesson I'd carry forward. Private property isn't a stage for someone else's show. It's a promise you keep, to yourself, to your family, and to the land that trusts you to guard it. I finished my coffee, set the cup down, and listened as the night settled in. No more engines, no more tents, no more strangers wandering where they didn't belong. Just the sound of cattle shifting, crickets singing, and the sure click of a lock holding steady in the dark. The storm had passed, and my ranch was mine again.